The last slice of pecan pie was still sitting in the center of my Thanksgiving table when someone knocked on the front door. Eleanor had been gone 6 months, but no one had touched that slice because, for 46 years, she had always said it belonged to the unexpected guest. I opened the door, expecting a neighbor. Instead, a woman about my daughter's age stood in the cold, holding an old photograph of my wife cradling a newborn baby. Then she looked past me at the pie and said, "Eleanor promised there would always be one slice left for me." If you have ever discovered that someone you loved carried a secret alone, stay with me. For a moment, I could not speak. Behind me, my son Ben pushed back his chair. My daughter Claire rose more slowly, watching the stranger the way a librarian studies a damaged page before deciding whether it can be saved. "Who are you?" Ben asked. The woman kept her hands visible. "Rebecca Nolan. I'm not here for money." That was the wrong sentence to lead with. Ben stepped between us. I had spent 28 years in National Guard logistics and another 16 managing operations for our school district. I had learned that people usually reveal what they fear losing before they reveal what they want. Rebecca feared being mistaken for a thief. "How did you know Eleanor?" I asked. Her eyes moved to the empty chair at the far end of the table. "She was my mother." The room seemed to contract around those 4 words. Ben let out a hard breath. Claire said nothing. I looked at the photograph. Eleanor appeared 18 or 19, standing beside a church pie table, a baby wrapped against her chest. The image was faded, but one detail was sharp enough to stop me. In Eleanor's right hand was the old silver pie server we still used every Thanksgiving, its handle marked by the same diagonal scratch I had noticed that morning. That scratch had come from a garbage disposal accident years before I met her. At least, that was the story she had told me. "Where did you get this?" I asked. Rebecca handed me the photograph. On the back, in Eleanor's unmistakable handwriting, were 6 words. "For Rebecca, when courage finally comes." Ben said it could have been copied. He was right. Claire said Eleanor's handwriting could be imitated. She was right, too. Grief can make a man believe what he wants, and I wanted this woman gone almost as badly as I wanted her to be telling the truth. "You can come inside," I said. Ben objected, but I held up one hand. Rebecca stepped across the threshold and removed a cream-colored envelope from her coat. She told me to give this only to you. My name was written across the front. I broke the seal and recognized Eleanor's careful script immediately. The first line made my knees weaken. "Arthur, before you decide whether Rebecca belongs here, you need to know what Margaret did." No one reached for the food after that. The turkey cooled on the platter, the mashed potatoes formed a thin skin, and the last slice of pecan pie remained exactly where Eleanor had always insisted it should stay until the meal was truly over. I unfolded the letter with hands that suddenly felt older than 74. Eleanor's handwriting was steady, but every sentence carried the weight of someone who knew she was running out of time. She did not explain everything. She never would have. Instead, she wrote that if Rebecca ever stood in our doorway, I should listen before making any decision, because some silences are chosen, and others are forced. She ended by asking me to trust my own judgment, rather than anyone else's memory of the past. Ben shook his head before I even finished reading. "Dad, this is exactly how scams start." Rebecca looked down instead of defending herself. "I understand why you think that." Claire quietly reached for the photograph. She turned it over several times, studying the paper itself rather than the image. "This print is old," she said softly. "Very old." Rebecca nodded. "It was mailed to me with Eleanor's letter 2 weeks ago." "Who mailed it?" I asked. "A friend named Lila Moreno." The name struck me immediately. Lila had baked pies beside Eleanor at church Thanksgiving dinners for more than 30 years. If someone wanted to invent a believable story, they could have found her name somewhere. But they would not have known that Lila and Eleanor still exchanged handwritten recipes every month because Eleanor never trusted email. Ben folded his arms. "So she found Mom's friend online." Rebecca slowly reached into her shoulder bag again. "I brought these because I thought you deserved proof." She placed a worn folder on the table. Inside were adoption papers, copies of certified mail receipts, and several envelopes that had all been stamped "Return to Sender." Each envelope carried Eleanor's maiden name. Each one had been mailed years apart. Each one had been returned unopened. I studied the dates. They stretched across nearly 20 years. "If she wanted to know you," Ben asked, "why didn't she come herself?" Rebecca's answer was almost too quiet to hear. "Because she believed I stopped writing." The room fell silent. Claire carefully opened one envelope without damaging it. Inside was Rebecca's original letter, still neatly folded. It had never been read. At least not by Eleanor. My eyes moved from the envelope to Eleanor's old recipe journal resting beside the coffee pot. Without thinking, I opened it to the Thanksgiving section. Every pie recipe Eleanor ever used was there, covered with tiny handwritten notes only she could understand. Halfway down one page, squeezed into the margin beside the pecan pie recipe, I found 4 words I had somehow overlooked for years. "Save last slice for R." I smiled despite myself. "That must be Aunt Ruth," I said. Eleanor's older aunt had loved pecan pie. The explanation felt comforting. Normal. Rebecca slowly shook her head. "My birthday is November 26th. Claire checked the date Eleanor had written beside the letter R. No one spoke. It wasn't Thanksgiving. It was November 26th, Rebecca's birthday. Before any of us could process what that meant, my phone rang. The caller ID read, Margaret Sloan. I let the phone ring 3 more times before answering. Margaret almost never called during Thanksgiving dinner, and when she did, it was usually because someone had forgotten cranberry sauce or left a serving bowl at her house. Tonight, before I could say hello, she spoke in the calm voice she always used when she wanted everyone else to feel unreasonable. "Arthur, I heard someone unexpected may have stopped by." I glanced across the dining room. Rebecca was staring through the window into the dark backyard, as if she were already preparing to leave. "Who told you that?" I asked. There was a pause so brief most people would have missed it. "I just heard." That answer bothered me more than anything else she could have said. Years in military logistics had taught me that information always had a route. Supplies, paperwork, rumors, they all traveled through someone. When people couldn't explain where information came from, they were usually protecting the route rather than the truth. Margaret continued. "If the woman's name is Rebecca Nolan, don't let her confuse you." Every muscle in my shoulders tightened. I had never told Margaret Rebecca's last name. Neither had Ben. Neither had Claire. I looked slowly toward Rebecca. She wasn't listening. She couldn't hear Margaret's voice through the receiver. "How do you know her surname?" I asked. Silence. Then Margaret laughed softly. "Oh, Claire must have mentioned it years ago." Claire immediately shook her head. "I've never heard that name before tonight," she whispered. Margaret recovered quickly. "Arthur, grief makes people vulnerable. Eleanor would never have wanted strangers upsetting the family." The sentence sounded perfectly reasonable. That was exactly what made it dangerous. "I'll call you tomorrow," I replied. "No," Margaret answered almost too quickly. "Come see me first thing in the morning. Alone." I ended the call without promising anything. Ben exhaled. "See? Aunt Margaret already knows this woman." Rebecca slowly stood. "I think I should leave." "No," I said. Ben turned toward me. "Dad." I said no. Rebecca looked surprised. "So what happens now?" I carried Eleanor's recipe journal into my study, while Claire followed quietly behind me. The kitchen noises faded. I opened the journal again beneath my desk lamp. Every recipe Eleanor ever loved was organized with impossible precision. Dates, measurements, holiday menus, shopping lists, small reminders. Nothing was random. Then Claire pointed toward the inside cover. "I've never noticed this index." Tiny pencil marks listed initials beside page numbers. A BC. Then, several Thanksgiving entries appeared beside it. Not one, several. The handwriting was unquestionably Eleanor's. My comfortable explanation about Aunt Ruth suddenly collapsed. R wasn't mentioned anywhere else in the family. Only inside Thanksgiving pages. Only beside recipes Eleanor baked herself. Claire looked at me. "Dad?" Before she could finish, the doorbell rang again. This time it wasn't Rebecca. It was Lila Moreno. She stepped inside carrying an old flour-covered recipe box tied with blue ribbon. Her eyes found Rebecca immediately. Instead of surprise, I saw recognition. Lila set the box carefully on the kitchen table. "Eleanor prayed I'd never have to open this," she said quietly. She looked directly at me. "But she told me that if Rebecca ever found your front door..." Lila rested one hand on the ribbon. Then it was finally time. Lila did not untie the blue ribbon immediately. She stood beside Eleanor's empty chair for several seconds, gently brushing one hand across its back, as though asking permission to disturb something that had waited far too long. I had seen Lila laugh through burned pies, church fundraisers, and snowstorms that knocked out power to half the county. I had never seen her hesitate like this. "Eleanor made me promise," she said quietly, "that this box would never be opened unless Rebecca came to your front door on Thanksgiving." Ben frowned. "She planned this?" Lila looked at him with sad eyes. "No." She prayed it would never be necessary. She untied the ribbon. Inside the old flour-stained recipe box were dozens of neatly folded recipe cards, but beneath them rested something entirely different. 3 sealed envelopes, a small leather notebook, and a stack of certified mail receipts secured with a faded paperclip. My stomach tightened. Lila handed me the notebook first. "The last year of Eleanor's life," she whispered. "She asked me to keep it somewhere Margaret would never think to look." I opened it carefully. Unlike Eleanor's recipe journal, This notebook wasn't filled with ingredients or measurements. It was a timeline. Every page listed dates, letters mailed, letters expected, letters never answered. Beside several entries, Eleanor had written the same sentence. Margaret says nothing came. Then, several pages later, the sentence changed. Margaret signed for it. Claire leaned closer. She was tracking the mail. Not recipes, not memories. Mail. Years of logistics had trained my mind to recognize patterns before conclusions. Inventory systems, delivery routes, missing shipments. A problem usually revealed itself long before anyone admitted it existed. This notebook wasn't emotional. It was methodical. Eleanor hadn't been writing from suspicion anymore. She had been documenting evidence. Ben still looked unconvinced. Maybe Mom misunderstood something. I hoped she had, Lila answered softly. I kept praying she was wrong. Rebecca had not moved from the doorway. She looked as though she were afraid to breathe. Lila picked up the stack of certified mail receipts. Arthur, compare these. I spread Rebecca's returned envelopes across the table beside Eleanor's notebook. Claire immediately began matching dates. 1, 2, 4, 7. Every certified receipt Eleanor kept matched a returned envelope Rebecca had saved. The dates aligned perfectly. The silence inside the kitchen became unbearable. Then Claire stopped. This signature. She held one receipt beneath the light. The signature wasn't Eleanor's. It wasn't mine. It wasn't anyone from our household. It read, Margaret Sloane. Ben stared at it for several seconds. There has to be another explanation. I thought so too, Lila replied. For almost 20 years. She reached into the recipe box again. The third envelope was addressed in Eleanor's handwriting. Not to me. Not to Rebecca. To Margaret. Across the front, Eleanor had written only one sentence. You cannot decide for both of us forever. Nobody opened it. Nobody had to. Its existence said enough. The room felt completely different now. Rebecca was no longer simply a stranger with an extraordinary story. Margaret was no longer simply the protective older sister who had always organized family reunions and remembered everyone's birthdays. The center of the mystery had shifted. It was no longer about whether Rebecca belonged. It was about how many years someone had stolen from both women. I looked again at Eleanor's careful timeline. One final entry had been written only 3 weeks before she died. The handwriting shook more than the earlier pages, but it was still unmistakably hers. Saturday. Margaret's cedar chest. She never throws letters away. Every eye in the room lifted toward me. I knew exactly where that cedar chest was. Tomorrow morning, movers were scheduled to empty Margaret's house before she downsized into assisted living. If those letters were still inside, we had less than 12 hours before they disappeared forever. For the first time that evening, I stopped reacting like a grieving husband. I started thinking like the logistics officer I used to be. And I quietly decided that tomorrow, Margaret would believe I was coming to help her. She could not suspect I was coming for the truth. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Eleanor standing in our kitchen, carefully wrapping the last slice of pie while smiling that quiet smile I had mistaken for contentment all those years. By sunrise, I understood something that hurt more than grief itself. My wife had not spent her final months trying to uncover a stranger. She had been trying to reach her daughter before time ran out, and I had been sitting across the breakfast table believing her silence meant peace. At 7:30 Friday morning, Ben insisted on driving with me to Margaret's house. "I don't like this," he admitted as we turned onto her street. "But if there's even a chance Mom was telling the truth, I need to know." I appreciated his honesty more than certainty. When we arrived, moving trucks already lined the curb. Men carried boxes through the front door, while Margaret stood on the porch, directing them with the same calm authority she had used my entire adult life. The moment she saw me, she smiled. "I knew you'd come." She hugged me gently, then looked toward Ben. "I suppose you've both had time to think more clearly." "I have," I answered. That much was true. Inside the house, everything smelled of old cedar and furniture polish. Family photographs covered the walls, each one carefully labeled in Margaret's handwriting. Looking around, I realized she had spent decades preserving everyone else's memories. The question was whether she had been preserving them or editing them. "I don't want Rebecca turning Eleanor's funeral into some tragic mystery," Margaret said, while leading us toward the den. "Your wife carried enough guilt without reopening old mistakes." The word mistakes stayed with me. Not misunderstanding, not rumor, mistakes. She knew exactly what Rebecca represented. I lowered my voice. "I've decided you're probably right." Margaret relaxed almost immediately. "I knew you would. I just want this finished before the grandchildren hear any of it." Her shoulders dropped. The tension left her face. That single moment told me more than an hour of arguing ever could. She believed I had surrendered. She no longer had any reason to guard herself. "There's one thing," I continued. "Lila brought over some old recipe notes last night. I thought maybe we should gather everything connected to Eleanor's past and destroy it together tomorrow evening." Margaret nodded without hesitation. That's exactly what Eleanor would have wanted. No, it wasn't. But I let the lie remain between us. Ben glanced at me, confused by how easily I seemed to agree. Margaret poured coffee while the movers carried another stack of boxes outside. Then I saw it. Against the far wall, an old cedar chest with brass corners. Exactly where Eleanor's notebook said it would be. It looked untouched. Margaret noticed my eyes lingering there. "Oh, that's only old family papers," she smiled. "I'll bring them tomorrow." I forced myself to look away. Good. Nothing in my military career had taught me that the fastest way to expose a hidden supply line was often to leave it exactly where it was. The same rule applied to people. If Margaret believed she controlled the timing, she would bring the evidence herself. We stayed less than 30 minutes. As we walked back toward my truck, Ben grabbed my arm. "Dad, why did you agree with her?" "Because if Margaret thinks we've stopped asking questions, she'll stop hiding answers." He stared at me. For the first time since Rebecca arrived, I saw something change in his expression. Not certainty, Rust. Back at the house, Claire was waiting with Lila and Rebecca around the kitchen table. Stacks of papers covered every available surface. Claire looked exhausted. I finished comparing every date. She slid one sheet toward me. Each certified mail receipt matched one of Rebecca's returned letters. Every route ended at Margaret's address. Then Claire pointed to a blank space near the bottom of her timeline. There's only one thing we still can't explain. She handed me a faded black and white photograph I had never seen before. Eleanor stood outside the county courthouse with a young Margaret. Between them sat the same cedar chest. Written across the back, in Eleanor's hand, were 8 words. Everything important is inside until truth is safe. Saturday arrived under a gray November sky that made the whole town feel as though it were holding its breath. By noon, every chair in my dining room had been moved into a wide circle instead of around the table. Eleanor always believed difficult conversations should happen where everyone could see one another. I finally understood she had been preparing me for this gathering long before I knew why. Rebecca wanted to leave before anyone arrived. "I don't belong in this," she said quietly, while folding her coat across one arm. "You've already done more for me than I expected." I shook my head. "If you leave now, Margaret wins without saying another word." She looked toward Eleanor's empty chair. "I've spent 55 years feeling like the unexpected guest." "You aren't the unexpected guest anymore," I replied. "You're the reason she kept setting one place aside." Rebecca lowered her eyes, unable to answer. Claire was sitting at the kitchen island, surrounded by photographs, copies of certified mail receipts, Eleanor's notebook, and a spreadsheet she had created from every date we could verify. She had arranged everything chronologically, refusing to include a single assumption. "I checked the postal records again," she said. Every certified letter Eleanor mailed to Rebecca passed through Margaret's address before disappearing. Every returned letter Rebecca received follows the same pattern. Years ago, that chart would have reminded me of a supply chain audit. Missing shipments rarely vanished at random. They disappeared wherever one person controlled the flow. Lila entered carrying Eleanor's recipe journal inside a clear plastic sleeve. "I found this in the church office copier," she explained. "Eleanor asked me to make copies years ago, in case anything ever happened to the original." Ben stared at her. "You never mentioned that." "Eleanor made me promise." The copies mattered more than I expected. When we compared them with the damaged journal now sitting in our house, one page Margaret had quietly removed appeared perfectly preserved. Across the top, Eleanor had written only 4 words. She signed every receipt. Below it were 6 certified mail numbers. Everyone matched the receipts Rebecca had saved for decades. Track after track, date after date. No missing links remained. Ben slowly sat down. "I handed the original journal to Aunt Margaret yesterday." His voice cracked. "I thought I was protecting Mom." "You were protecting the version of her life you were given," I answered. "That's different." He covered his face with both hands. "I helped destroy evidence." "No," Claire said gently. "You helped us discover who was afraid of it." The doorbell rang exactly at 5. Margaret stepped inside carrying the old cedar chest with both hands. Behind her came 2 neighbors from church who had volunteered to help finish packing her house. She smiled warmly when she saw everyone gathered together. "I brought every old paper I could find," she announced. "Let's finally put this painful misunderstanding behind us." She set the cedar chest on the dining table. The brass latch clicked open. She believed she was controlling the moment. She had no idea every document already had a matching date, receipt, photograph, or copy waiting beside it. I poured her a cup of coffee just as Eleanor always had. Then I quietly slid the reconstructed timeline across the table. Margaret glanced at the first page and smiled politely. By the second page, the smile weakened. By the third, she stopped reaching for her coffee. I looked at her calmly. "Margaret," I said, "before anyone opens that cedar chest, I'm giving you one last chance." I rested Eleanor's final notebook beside the timeline. "If there's anything you want to tell this family before the papers speak for you, now is the time." For several long seconds, Margaret stared at the notebook without moving. Then she pushed it gently back toward me. "I have nothing to confess." The room fell completely silent. At that moment, I understood something Eleanor had written in the margin of her notebook, but never explained. Some people stop lying long before they stop protecting the lie. I nodded once, closed the notebook, and placed both hands on the lid of the cedar chest. The truth was finally within reach. Margaret still believed she could survive it. She was about to discover that evidence has far more patience than memory. I lifted the lid of the cedar chest with both hands. The hinges groaned softly, as though they had been waiting years to move again. A faint scent of cedar, old paper, and lavender drifted into the room. Nobody spoke. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed louder than usual. The first thing inside was not a bundle of letters. It was a small white baby blanket, folded with impossible care. Rebecca covered her mouth. "I remember that," she whispered. "Or, at least I remember being told about it." Margaret closed her eyes. For the first time all afternoon, she looked tired instead of composed. Beneath the blanket lay dozens of envelopes tied together with faded blue ribbon. Everyone carried Rebecca's name. Everyone had already been opened. None had ever reached Eleanor. I picked up the oldest. The postmark was 33 years old. Inside, Rebecca had written in neat blue ink, "Dear Mom, I don't know if you're receiving these anymore, but I'll keep writing until I know for certain that you don't want me. Please don't spend another Thanksgiving wondering whether I'm angry. I'm not. I just miss you." The paper trembled in my hands. I looked toward Margaret. "You opened these." She said nothing. Claire carefully untied the remaining bundle. Letter after letter told the same story. Rebecca graduating from nursing school. Rebecca getting married. Rebecca losing her husband. Rebecca celebrating birthdays alone every Thanksgiving weekend because she believed her mother had chosen silence. Not one letter accused Eleanor. Every single one hoped for reconciliation. Lila quietly wiped away tears. "Eleanor never saw any of these." "No," I answered. She spent decades believing Rebecca had stopped writing. Then Ben discovered another bundle beneath the letters. These envelopes were addressed in Eleanor's handwriting. Everyone had been opened. Everyone carried the same forwarding label through Margaret's address. Rebecca unfolded the first one. "My sweet Rebecca, if this reaches you, please know there has never been one Thanksgiving when I failed to save the last slice for you. People tell us time heals everything. They're wrong. Only truth does." Rebecca could not continue reading. Claire gently finished the letter aloud. I pray that one day you will knock on Arthur's door. He is the kindest man I have ever known. If I am no longer there, he will listen where others judged." Rebecca began crying silently. Not dramatic sobs, the quiet kind that seemed to come from somewhere far older than tears. I looked across the table. Margaret had not moved. She stared at the floor. Finally, I asked the question none of us had wanted to ask. "Why?" She answered without lifting her head. "Because I thought I was saving her." Nobody interrupted. "When Rebecca was born," Margaret continued, "our father said Eleanor's life would be ruined if anyone found out. I arranged the adoption. Later, when Eleanor married you, she wanted Rebecca back." She stopped. "I couldn't bear watching her destroy the family she'd built." "So you stole 30 years, Ben said quietly. I kept telling myself it was only one more letter. Margaret's voice broke. Then another, and another. After enough years, I didn't know how to admit what I'd done. Silence settled over the room. No one shouted. No one insulted her. The evidence had already done everything anger could have accomplished. I reached into the very bottom of the cedar chest. One final envelope remained. Unlike the others, it had never been opened. Across the front, Eleanor had written, "For Arthur, read only after the truth is complete." I looked around the room. Rebecca, Claire, Ben, Lila, Margaret. Every face carried the weight of a different kind of loss. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was only a single folded page. No one spoke while I began to read. By the second paragraph, I realized Eleanor had known exactly how this day would end. She had left me one final request. It was not about forgiveness. It was not about justice. It was about what our family would choose to become after the truth finally belonged to everyone. I unfolded Eleanor's final letter with hands that no longer trembled from uncertainty. They trembled because I finally understood how much strength it had taken her to carry hope without proof for so many years. My dearest Arthur, if you are reading this, then Rebecca finally found her way home. That single sentence blurred beneath my tears, not because Eleanor had predicted the future, because she had never stopped believing in it. She wrote that she had spent years asking herself whether she should tell me everything after Margaret insisted the past would only destroy the family we had built together. Every Thanksgiving, she decided she would tell me after dinner. Then fear always arrived before courage. "I never doubted your heart," she wrote. "I doubted my own ability to survive losing both of you if everything fell apart." I looked toward Rebecca. She was listening with the quiet attention of someone who had waited an entire lifetime for another person's words. The letter continued. "Arthur, if the truth has finally come into this house, promise me one thing. Do not spend whatever years you have left deciding who deserves punishment. Spend them making sure no one ever has to wonder whether they belong at this table again." That was Eleanor. Even now, after decades of loss, she was thinking less about blame than about belonging. She had left one final instruction. "Please serve the last slice of pie." The room grew perfectly still. I smiled through tears I could no longer hide. Without saying a word, Claire walked into the kitchen. A few moments later, she returned carrying the untouched pecan pie Eleanor had baked before her illness made standing too difficult. The final slice still rested exactly where Eleanor had always left it. I picked up the silver pie server with its tiny scratch, the same one from the old photograph. I carried the plate across the room. Not to Ben, not to Claire, not to myself. I stopped in front of Rebecca. "Eleanor saved this for you," I said softly. "She just needed more Thanksgivings than either of us expected." Rebecca accepted the plate with both hands as tears streamed down her face. Ben was the first to stand. He crossed the room and embraced her. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I judged you before I knew the truth." "We both lost the same person," Rebecca replied. Claire joined them, then Lila. Finally, Margaret slowly walked across the room. "I can't give you back the years I stole," she said quietly. "I don't expect forgiveness." Rebecca looked at her for a long moment before answering. "We can't change where the letters went." She glanced around the table. "But we can choose where the next ones will." That evening, after everyone had gone home, I stood alone in the kitchen. The chair where Eleanor always sat was still empty. But for the first Thanksgiving since losing her, the silence no longer felt lonely. It felt peaceful. I looked at the empty pie plate and finally understood what my wife had been trying to teach all of us. She had never been saving the last slice of pie. She had been saving hope. And somehow, after all those years, hope finally found its way home. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever discovered a family truth that changed the way you saw someone you loved? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience may be exactly what another viewer needs to read today. And if you enjoy stories about family, dignity, forgiveness, and quiet courage, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Quiet Valor Stories so you won't miss our next journey together. Thank you sincerely for spending your time with me today. Wherever you are, I hope your home is filled with love, your heart is strengthened by hope, and your family always finds its way back to one another. Until next time, take good care of yourself and the people who matter most.